A few minutes ago, another disconnection of the electrical system seems occurred. The restoration work begins immediately. So far, the Unit 5 of the 10 of October, the thermoelectric plant in Nuevitas, province of Camagüey, was triggered, and that collapsed the system from the province of Ciego de Ávila to Holguín. Added to this was the disconnection of the western circuit due to the tripping of the electrical legs. And as we were saying a few minutes ago, another disconnection of the electrical system occurred, and the restoration works began immediately. Now that we have cleared information in which zones are the disconnection. But we have our correspondent and colleague, Maria Belen de Los Santos, with more information. Hi, Belen, how are you?
Hello, Anna. How are you? Exactly as you were saying, it's been a tough couple of days here in Cuba after the total disconnection from the electric system that happened on Friday. And as you were saying, the last bit of news is that just moments ago, a new disconnection from the electric system was announced by the Ministry of Energy and Mines. And as you were saying, this was a disconnection that affected the unit that came from the Unit 5 of the 10 de Octubre power plant, and it affected the system from Ciego de Ávila to Holguín, and also this was added to a disconnection in the western circuit. So that is the last affection that happened here in Cuba. This was just moments ago, and also this comes after a press conference that happened today where the Minister of Mines and Energy addressed the population through a press conference, and in the press conference he gave several details regarding the actual situation. The main points of his address had to do with really explaining how the recovery process was underway. Let's recall that the affection that happened from the disconnection at the national level that happened on Friday, the reestablishment of the power is a very complicated and delicate process. This is going through by creating different microsystems, energy microsystems that need to be stabilized and consolidated for them to give energy at different points of the country, and also then power the thermoelectric power plants that can then supply energy to larger portions of the population. That process is very delicate, and so the minister was explaining how any minor disturbance in these systems that are being created can affect the supply, so some disconnections can occur. This happened specifically in Havana on Monday and Saturday morning, and also on Saturday night. And then that was what we knew so far, and this was another disconnection today. So that was what happened, and that was the press conference.
That was in the conference with the Minister of Energy and Mines, Vicente de la O, right? Well, do you hear me?
Anna, I'm sorry, we were having some connections. Can you repeat the last question?
The report that you gave us was what was addressed at the conference with the Minister of Energy and Mines, Vicente de la O, right?
Exactly. So we were talking about what Vicente de la O, Minister of Energy and Mines, was talking about regarding the situation. He was explaining how these disconnections, such as the one that was just announced, also were part of this delicate process. However, the most important thing that was also stated at that press conference is that the ministry and the authorities are expecting that between Monday and Tuesday, the situation of the energy coverage will be back to the point before the national disconnection that occurred on Friday. That means that we would be going back to the original situation, which was already a critical situation. And this is an important point to make, because Cuba is at a critical point in terms of energy. This was also part of the address that Prime Minister Marrero had last week, and this is basically due to lack of access to fuel, for example, and also maintaining pieces and maintaining things that need to be used to support the thermoelectric power plants. So that this is a situation that Cuba has been dealing with and is continuing to dealing with, but this disconnection that happened on Friday is supposed to be solved for until Monday and Tuesday, and that was one of the points that the minister said in his press conference today.
Yeah, and also another question. How does the U.S. blockades for more than 60 years affect this new crisis in the country?
So this is a very important point and also a highlight of the press conference and also of all the Cuban authorities that have been addressing the situation. We cannot truly understand the situation in Cuba today and also the situation with the energy sector if we do not understand how the current situation is affected by the U.S. blockade. So in the press conference today, the minister was referring to the lack of access to fuel and also to the lack of access to maintenance parts that have to do with the entire maintenance system of keeping up the recovery of the thermoelectric power plants. Let's recall that the thermoelectric power plants in Cuba are decades old and they need a lot of maintenance, and sometimes the blockade will prevent the country from getting the correct pieces and the correct requirement equipment to maintain those power plants going. The minister was making the point that so far the electric system is being maintained in many cases by the creativity and the knowledge and the hard work and effort of all the Cuban technicians. But of course, the U.S. blockade is severely hindering these works of maintenance that are going through and that are being done day by day. And this is just one more moment of collapse due to that affection that is being caused by the U.S. blockade. So the lack of access to fuel, the lack of access to correct equipment to maintain the thermoelectric power plants are all a cause and consequences of this blockade that sometimes when we address it, it can sound a bit abstract, but today that blockade means that Cubans cannot access their regular energy supplies. They cannot use their refrigerators. They are having a hard time continuing their day-to-day routines because this blockade is affecting the energy supply. And even this being the case, Cuba is thinking of recovering the system up to Friday's point by Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, and one last question. How does the government is acting in respect to Hurricane Oscar and its proximity with Cuba and in this electric crisis too?
Yes, so this is important to keep in mind because as we are speaking and as the country is dealing with this severe instance that was the total disconnection that happened on Friday from the electric system, also Hurricane Oscar is coming through the eastern side of Cuba and is expected to hit today, actually. So this affects not only that side of the island, but also it can disrupt the reactivation process, as a lot of thermoelectric power plants also are located in that side of the country and can be affected by the storm, by high winds. So these two situations are really colliding at this moment, and Cuba is doing its best to deal with both things. So you were asking about how the government is responding. You know that Cuba has a long history of being able to prepare its defense forces against this sort of natural disruptions as the hurricane. Of course, the protocols are always to prioritize the saving of lives. So if any people in that area need to be evacuated, also prioritizing any affections that could happen to hospitals, patients that need chronic treatment, and then in a second place, any prevention that can be due to save material goods as well. So all of that is taking place as, again, the eastern part of the country prepares for the hit of Hurricane Oscar. And in general, just as more information, for the next couple of days from Monday to Wednesday, the government announced that all activities will be interrupted except for essential activities, so that affects schools, for example. So the country is preparing to face these two very important issues that are coming their way, and everything is prepared to continue the recovery and the reestablishment of the power supply, as they also prepare for the affections that might come from the Hurricane Oscar in the east.
Yeah, and this is, like the last question, really. How do you see the population? How are they acting? How is it their reception about the energetic crisis and the Hurricane Oscar? And in general, how is their attitude?
Well, I think that we need to point out that the Cuban people is a very resilient people. So, of course, these couple of days have been tense days because the day-to-day life is affected by the power outage. However, if you go through the streets of Havana yesterday, today, people were going about their daily routines as good as they can, even with the power outages. Food fares were up. People were getting their groceries, they're continuing their lives, and they're getting as much supplies as they can, also thinking about what may happen with the incoming Hurricane Oscar, even though it's not announced that it will hit the capital city, but yes, in the eastern part of the country. So really, we are talking about a major situation with the energy crisis. However, the Cuban people are very resilient people. The Cuban people, the minister also pointed it out today at his press conference. He was talking about, in general, from the population, receiving messages of a lot of support and understanding. It's a people that they know how to deal with this major difficulties, and they really do so by keeping their calm, keeping their routines, continuing to go throughout the day, and they are confident that the system will be picked up because the workers are continuing their work efforts. They have been non-stop since Friday in recovering the power system. The same can be said for the defense teams that are preparing for Hurricane Oscar. And this just is incorporated into the life of Cubans that are just waiting for this to develop itself. And also another important thing to point out is that official communication has been constant and permanent even before this electric failure from Wednesday occurred. Just the night before, Prime Minister Marrero had addressed the population to explain that it was a delicate situation, and it was delicate because of the lack of access to fuel. And this prepared the scenario so that people knew what was coming, and actually it was a bigger disconnection than anticipated. This was not something that the government could have foreseen, but the people were ready, the people were aware of the situation, and they continue to live their lives and continue to wait for this reestablishment that we hope will come in the coming days.
Thank you very much, Belen, for your updates, for your remarks, and for all your information you gave about the situation in Cuba. See you soon.
Of course. Thank you, Anna. See you soon.
More information and updates about all the situation in Cuba and the world from the south.